we have on the left, of course, several things that support us in getting to that. And so we like to call it creating liberatory learning environments for youth. So spaces where they can truly, authentically connect to their identity, to find a sense of belonging within a space, and then to have agency to create change within their society. And so one of those main areas is prioritizing wellness and healing for the adults that are working with the youth and also for the youth. We know that if the adults are not well, then how can they support youth to thrive, right? And so we want it to be a both and really for families as well. Ultimately, our goal is to improve the social emotional learning skills of youth, resiliency, and again, to build that youth leadership so that youth can ultimately thrive. And so we found that wellness has been a huge part of this process. So within our cohort, we've decided to focus on the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so it looks at wellness as a holistic approach. It's not just one specific thing, but it's important for us to focus on our occupational wellness, environmental wellness, our social wellness, as well as our physical wellness. And so we have engaged in this in many different ways. One, we have larger convenings at the beginning of our fiscal year, and we facilitate our cohort members to go through a wellness wheel. And so it's a intentional time to stop and think about each of these areas. And what areas am I doing well? There are specific questions under each area too. What areas could I grow in a little bit more? What do I want my focus to be? And so with that, they're able to talk amongst their teams and with their staff and individually to create an actual plan, goals for themselves within their wellness areas. And then we gather the information of areas that they feel most strongly in needing support with. And we take that information and we bring in speakers and resources and create wellness challenges that will help to encourage building skills and thriving in these different areas. And so that's one way that we focus on wellness. Another large piece is the community resiliency model, which I referenced earlier. And so this is a very simple tool. It's a set of 6 wellness skills that help us to balance our nervous system. And so everyone deals with stress and trauma. It can be small things such as dealing with traffic coming into work to larger things like losing a loved one or pandemics. And so with this, at all of our convenings, we have everyone check in. And so they just use like a little sticky to represent where they are. So if you notice the yellow line in the middle, that kind of goes up and down, but that is you being in your okay zone, your resilient zone. So in that zone, you're able to pretty much function like your normal self, whatever normal is for you. But then sometimes we can get knocked out of that zone and we're just not really able to function or thrive. And this is where the point of burnout comes. We're either knocked into our low zone, which can be represented by the freeze, if you think of fight, flight, or freeze. And that's when we might feel depressed or sad or isolated or just even feelings of numbness. Or you can get knocked into the high zone, which is where we feel edgy and irritable, or maybe we will have an outburst more quickly than we normally would because we're not in our zone. And so the 6 skills of the community resiliency model help us to widen that zone so we don't get bumped out as quickly or easily. And it also helps us to come back into our zone when we are bumped out, because as human beings with biology, we're all bumped out of our zone at times. And so this has been an amazing model that we have taught deeply to our staff. Our staff teaches and facilitates this deeply with our cohort members. We've also been sharing this with the youth. Our youth advisory council right now is initiating a program where adults and youth together will come together to learn these strategies deeply, along with another strategy called critical incident stress management. And after learning these skills and being certified in them, they'll regularly convene together to practice the skills and then also take those skills out into their community, into their own neighborhoods, and be able to share with people that they know to ultimately create a more resilient community. And so we really have the intention to start amongst our staff, within our cohort, and then ultimately the community. So amongst that, we also have been coming up with some universal practices that we check in with each other about. This list will continue to grow, but again, as I mentioned, we all use the community resiliency model to check in before entering a space. And then as we did together when we first came in, we all center together with the grounding activity. We also have some pretty solid social emotional learning and resiliency practices. We've created games and activities and posters and resources to help to make it easy for everyone to implement those skills. We also have liberatory learning environment vibe agreements. And so that just shows, I have a slide for that coming up, but it shows what does it mean to have a space of liberation? How can we create that for youth and ultimately for the adults in the space as well? We've created common vocabulary and definitions for social justice issues that impact youth, for them to be able to talk about in safe, supportive spaces with adults. And then also other healing-centered engagement strategies that we have adopted from Sean Ginwright and the Flourish Agenda in their certification programs. And then this is right now our snapshot of what a liberatory learning environment incorporates. And so again, this is our ultimate goal to get youth to thriving. And so we try to model and acknowledge and welcome these ideas into our youth spaces and with adults. So, and I'm not going to read them. You can skim over them and feel free to ask if you have any questions about any specific ones.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for the overview, Abra. Tell us a little bit more about the cohort, like who's in the cohort, what level of staff, just so we understand who's participating.
Sure. So our cohort consists of adults that work with youth in after school and summer programs. And so these, we call them youth development advocates, also directors and supervisors of those programs. And so we support them with coaching, training, and technical assistance.
Okay. And just because we had a conversation earlier, just to get back to the origin. So this was something I think that really started internally, and then you started going to the community. Is that right? Can you tell us a little more about like sort of what motivated it, and then how you knew organizations in the community really wanted this?
Sure, yeah. We found that in the beginning, especially after COVID, there was a lot of turnover, we do a lot of surveying. And so just asking questions, and we were constantly engaged with our cohort members throughout COVID. We just had to find different ways to do that, mostly virtual. And the cry and the feedback that we heard was that staff wanted to be supported within their wellness, that they wanted that to be the priority, that they were burned out, that they wanted to find ways to connect with their youth and families, and didn't always know how to do that. And so it was really a cry for that support. We also, within our community has responded to that. So that was just our sector, the OST sector, but other nonprofit arenas, I guess, also had a similar cry. And so one of our local funders, the Stryker Johnston Foundation, developed a generous grant for our city and organizations that were being funded by them for wellness resources. And so those wellness resources were for staff specifically, and incorporated anything that brought staff rest, wellness, and joy. And so you were able to be creative with those funds. And so within our team, we have created wellness challenges regularly, where we focus on one of those 8 dimensions of wellness. And there might be different tasks and activities that you can do individually or together with a team. Maybe it's go for a walk, every day this week, or ground your feet in the grass, or to try some breathing activities, or to try to incorporate more green food within your diet that week, or even to create a savings goal or plan, or to schedule a counseling appointment. And so things from the varying areas of the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so there's just been a lot of support around that. Our staff has mentioned that wellness has been one of their the reasons why they come to work, and one area that really helps them to feel well and to thrive and to feel valued. And so you want to come to a place where you really feel valued. And so we're seeing that a lot, that they feel seen, heard, valued, appreciated. And we're really seeing our team's camaraderie, the way that we work together, prove that our wellness strategies have been working well. Even our HR consultants have been asking us, so what is it that you all do to have such a supportive and strong team, such a connected team?
Oh,
So this is really one of those reasons.
great. So that's very cool that the local funder saw the need and made grants specifically for that across the nonprofit community. And so that supported your internal work. Does that also support the cohort work?
It does support, well, it does. It's mostly for the staff, but all of our cohort members are able to write for that grant as well, or were able to when it was open.
Got it.
And so
Okay.
many of the cohort members receive that. But it does support. So we have our communities of practice, which we previously called professional development trainings for a week. And so we intentionally incorporated wellness into that as well. We did a session on the 8 dimensions of wellness, and we had them with the wellness wheels. We actually have them do that twice a year. So it's not just a one and done, but they're able to truly reflect on what their goals were previously, to see how that's changed and what's updated. And then we had breakout sessions, and we had area experts from each of the 8 dimensions areas, and they were able to attend whatever sessions matched their wellness wheel. So we had a financial session, a physical wellness session, an emotional wellness session, and others. And then we also had a break time with a few different wellness activities. We had a massage therapist come, and then also someone that did some yoga and sound bath activities.
Great.
So just ways to intentionally incorporate it into everything we do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to bring you back in a little bit, but we want to switch over to our speakers from Indiana to share their examples, and then we'll hear more from you in a little bit. But thank you, Abra.
Sounds great. Absolutely.
Resources that you're offering to your staff and your community. Okay, so I'm going to welcome Tami Silverman and Lakshmi Hasanadka, hopefully I said that correctly, to join us here. So Tami and Lakshmi, before we dive into the work that you're going to share, I'd love to hear just a little bit from your own stories and sort of how you came to this role that you're in now. So maybe Lakshmi, do you want to start?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks for having us here. It's great to see all of you, and shout out to my 50 state network colleagues. But I'm Lakshmi Hasanadka. I'm the CEO at Indiana Afterschool Network, as you said. And I have worked in a lot of different fields. I started off in marketing and advertising, and I'm a lawyer. And I got into youth development, running a group home for teen moms who are homeless. And that direct service is so rewarding and so challenging. And we worked with 5 moms at a time and made a deep impact on those 5 moms. But I could see all kinds of big challenges that are happening at a systems level that, at a small nonprofit, you cannot do anything about. So I appreciate the role that we have now at a systems level, to be able to try to make systems level changes and impact on big problems that, the programs that we work with are facing, like a ton of challenges around staff recruitment, staff retention, and why is that? And so, that's how I came here to this work.
Great, thanks. Tami?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for being here. And thanks, Abra. I didn't realize how much I needed that grounding exercise at the start. It's always helpful and beneficial. We've started incorporating that into our staff meetings as well, a similar one, but I thank you for sharing that, because it's been a busy morning already. My background, my undergrad education is in business, and I started off in commercial banking. Although, thinking I was going to forge a new path, I was raised in a family of educators. And sure enough, pretty soon that draws you in. I have 16 family members who are educators in Indiana, including both of my parents and my spouse. And so kind of just moved into the nonprofit space through volunteering a lot. And my first foray into nonprofit leadership was as the CEO of a family violence prevention organization. And so working in that for over a decade, again, seeing the extreme violence and trauma that just went across the families, and then also managing a staff. And at that time, we called it vicarious trauma, and really worked to address what does that mean and how do we retain individuals. At that time in our organization and in our coalition, the average tenure was about 4 years that folks could work before they just said, gosh, it's just so much. We love the mission, we love the work, it's just, I can't do this anymore. And so coming to an intermediary organization, we at Indiana Youth Institute cover anything. We say, the beauty of our mission is anything to do with kids in Indiana from birth to adulthood, and that adulthood is defined by whatever system you're talking to or group. So with juvenile justice, that's a particular age. If we're talking about brain maturation, that's a different age. So having the opportunity to work in a given year, we work with about 3,800 unique youth serving organizations in our state. And we were hearing those same messages as it relates to this project that we heard, that Abra spoke about, that Lakshmi spoke about, that you spoke about at the opening of, we're stretched. And we know that's something that has been around at least as long as I've been in the field, and perhaps, obviously longer, but then seeing it in such high relief during COVID, I think really garnered some more attention. And I know as we go to talk about the work we're doing, that was kind of one of those pivot points, and where the opportunity for the Indiana Youth Worker Wellbeing Project kicked off. So are we good if I share my slides?
Yeah, please. So just a little background. So I think many folks have probably heard a little bit about this Indiana Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, but what I'm particularly excited about today is certainly lay it out what it is and why you're doing it, but then also you're in it. So like, what are you learning? And I think that's going to be really interesting. So yes, please share.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
All right. Well, we're excited to share with you about the Indiana Youth Worker Wellbeing Project. And we wanted to start off with just a little bit of an overview about what the project is. This is a $20 million investment over 4 years. We are 1.5 years into the implementation, but it started with about 1.5 years of planning before that. And so we're going to share a little bit about what we learned during the planning process and why we came up with these projects, but the initiatives, but we wanted to start off and let you know what the project is first. So this project serves Indiana youth serving organizations and youth development professionals who work in community-based agencies that support youth development. And, we have a pretty broad yet also specific definition because we want to serve as many people as possible, but also we wanted to really make sure that our work focused on those who didn't have the big safety net that, for example, a government agency might have, or could have, I guess, or a school system might be able to have. So we're really focused on community-based agencies and youth development. And after an extensive planning process, we arrived at these 5 different programs. So the first is access to virtual or telehealth services. This is virtual urgent care and then virtual mental health counseling for up to 10,000 youth workers. That was our initial plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have peer support groups, and these are spaces where youth workers can gather to share experiences and support one another. So it's like a drop-in group, and we have clinically appropriate facilitator who facilitates the group. But you can show up if something happened that day. There's a place you can go to debrief and and that's what peer support groups are. We also have our Emerging Leaders of Color Development Series, and this is a cohort model. We are going to kick off our first cohort in the coming weeks, but you know, we know that those the demographics of people who work directly with youth is more often people of color, but then as you get into leadership, you don't see the diversity that you do in the direct care staff. And so we learned that this is a challenge related to opportunity and access. It is not related to skill, but the opportunities are more limited because of, well, for many reasons that I'm sure everyone here is aware of. And so this cohort is about developing those opportunities. We also have sub-grants, $6 million worth of sub-grants that we can give away over the next, well, for 4 years to develop programming related to DEIB for your staff or trauma-informed workplaces. And so, you know, we talk a lot about how to ensure inclusivity and equity for the young people we serve, or to ensure we're providing trauma-informed care for youth. But are we putting that same focus on how we treat our colleagues? And so that's what these sub-grants are designed to do. And then lastly, we have opportunity to convene the leaders of youth serving organizations, you know, to help them understand how to improve working conditions and business practices with the focus on improving youth worker well-being. So, team, if you want to go to the next slide.
Great. And so, you know, we want to talk a little bit about how we got there and who all is involved and what it took. And this is a collaborative project with 5 intermediary organizations. 4 out of the 5 are statewide organizations. 1 is regionally defined within our capital city. And so I think, you know, one of the things that we all agreed on early on was that, you know, we wanted this to be a co-created project that was reflective of what was most requested from the sector, not what any of us were. You know, we weren't, you know, there were some conversations of, are we looking to advance our individual work incrementally? And we all said, no, we want to do something that is innovative and hopefully transformative for the field of youth services in our state. And so each of these organizations that you see here, you know, are well known to one another. We all knew each other. We all intersected. Sometimes we collaborated on certain projects, but I would say most often we would get together and give updates, right? And so we would inform one another, but we had not deeply collaborated. And so part of the outcome was also to build this together. And I think that took just as much time and energy, perhaps, as identifying some of those services. And so we'll walk through kind of how we did that. I would say, you know, we have been meeting. In fact, we met this morning. We've been meeting every Friday for over 3 years now. First, it was how do we define the project? You know, what information do we need to gather? How are we launching the program? And now it's how's it going? And what do we need to continue to learn? In that time, obviously, we've gotten the program launched, and we'll share some of how it's going initially. But we've also had the time and the space to get to hear about each other's kids. And we were listening to someone this morning talking about her horse and things going on. And we know one of our members is an amateur, or I don't know if it's called an amateur pilot. He's a pilot of a little plane. It's not his profession. And so sometimes he's taking meetings from the hangar. You know, we've built some of those informal bonds and pathways that I think have been crucial to the success of the program. So with that, we'll give a kind of a high level, you know, again, we really knew that we were hearing all of this from the field, and several of us had been involved in a project that was responsive to COVID, and that engaging with programs and hearing what some of their challenges had been during the pandemic, and then knowing that they were focused a lot on how do they continue to serve their kids, right? So what adaptations did they need to make? And actually that it was a grant opportunity from a funder that we all share, that opportunity did focus on what did you need to do in your programs to serve children. We also then became even more aware, and I think it rose in the level of importance to what the impact was on the youth workers themselves. So in trying to figure out how might we approach an initiative, we said, let's make sure that we're getting the most current direct information. As somebody else, mentioned, we do a ton of surveying. We survey after every service. We have an annual survey. Most of the other peer organizations had great feedback as well, but we wanted to have it based on particularly youth worker well-being. So we had focus groups that we reached out. We had an advisory committee that we brought together several times. We had them prioritize what was most important to them and talking through that, and then making sure that we were responsive to that. So the top couple of concerns that came out from the focus groups, and again, focus groups, we needed to be geographically representative of our state. We needed that to be different years of experience, different positions in the field, different demographics, all of the various things. The top two concerns were that participants wanted to be connected, feel valued, and seen by their employers. Doesn't, make sense, right? And they identified mental health care access as a top concern. They were keenly aware of the needs of youth and knew that that would be valuable, and identified and told us that would be valuable to them as well. The advisory committee also identified access to mental health resources as the highest priority. So that's where we started.
Another thing that, during our research process and the planning process that came up is around diversity and inclusion. And this appeared in every conversation with the focus groups. It was essential in the planning process that it wasn't the five of us, these intermediary organizations, deciding what needed to be done. And so we wanted to make sure that we spent a lot of time listening. And so diversity and inclusion was a huge theme. Another theme was that, the youth workers of color who participated in our advisory group, in our focus groups, and then in our key informant interviews, talked about there were many times where they felt slighted, ignored, were victims of bias, microaggression in their workplace from their coworkers, supervisors, clients. And, for anyone who's experienced this, or, known someone who's experienced this, the work itself is hard enough, but when your coworkers or your supervisors are creating such an environment, you don't feel safe. Think about the impact on your well-being there. So that's why you see so many in our initiatives, such an emphasis on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. If you want to go to the next slide, Tami, thank you. So that's a bit of a background on the project. We also wanted to share a little bit about, how it's going. When we launched this project a year and a half ago, we heard from many folks on this call and many colleagues around the country, we want to hear how it's going, because we want it to go well. We want to see what's happening. So if you can go to the next slide, Tami, please. I want to share a little bit. The first project we launched was the virtual health services, telehealth, and virtual mental health. And these programs are for all staff, part-time and full-time. And, in the OST space, we have so many part-time employees. So this was a way to ensure that the part-time employees were getting health care. And I mean, you can see the utilization was it was well received. 4.7 star rating. Our goal for by January 1st of 2024, we wanted to have 5,000 people enrolled and 10,000 over the life of the project. And this report is from our, at the end of April, I think. And you can see we more than doubled our goal. We were able to figure out a way to serve even more individuals through the life of the project. So I want to also draw attention to the savings that employers experienced, as well as the number of hours employees saved from having to, the time it takes to make an appointment, to go to the appointment, and sitting in the waiting room and all that. I mean, the results that we're seeing so far have been really positive.
I would just add, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
Lakshmi, you know,
Please.
one of the things that we're also seeing is a large portion of our state is rural. And so, you know, even accessing, if you have a sore throat or a kid, the other thing that's important to note is that this covers every member of the household, and that can be defined however you choose. So if you have a child who has an earache and you were in a rural community and you would have to drive to an urgent care and all that time, we're seeing a tremendous amount of savings, not only from the youth workers, but also the stress of getting that care for their family members, their household members.
That's amazing.
Now, on the flip side, we'll share just real quick. We have two programs that have launched fully, peer support groups, and then this. And the peer support groups, 100% of people who have attended the peer support groups reported that it, Tami, you're going to have to help me here, but reduce their stress, that they
Absolutely.
feel more well, and they had a positive experience. However, the participation has been
yes,
much lower than we'd like. So we're working to iterate on that. And do you want to share anything else on that one or the other programs?
yeah, I think the folks that like it love it. You know, the folks that use it have really appreciated it. Again, as Lakshmi said, the uptick has just been slow, and we're trying to get feedback on why that is. And you know, we're launching a couple of different tests of that. And again, we have the facilitators, the clinicians that are facilitating that have been wonderfully adaptive and flexible. And, you know, perhaps we need a different time, perhaps we need to define it in a particular way, you know, additional promotions. We are launching our first Emerging Leaders of Color cohort in July. It's a group of up to 35 individuals. We had over about 88 applications for that, which we were excited about, and that will run a couple times a year. We also have launched the first round of the sub-grants, or the grants that are both focused on advancing DEIB practices within your own organization, or trauma responsive grants for your staff. And by the end of next week, because it's the end of our fiscal year, we will pay out over $1.2 million to 80 organizations across our state, so that then they can advance that work, particularly focused again on their workforce. One of the biggest challenges that we had, we did a lot of webinars and promo sessions and all of that, was that they kept wanting to immediately apply it to the kids they were aiming to serve. And we said, no, this is for your own staff. This is for your own team. And I think we'll continue to educate on that. And that's going to be a recurring service that's offered as well. So again, we, you know, most of the services are off to a great start. Peer support groups hasn't had as many takers as we would want. Everything else has, you know, the demand is certainly there, and the want to engage with these services. I mean, you all know that your coworkers in your organizations could likely benefit from some of these services.
Wow. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure folks are like, you know, have lots of questions. We have one in the chat around thinking about mental health stigma and whether this has helped reduce it. So I'm curious your thoughts on that to get us started. And we'll have a little bit of a conversation here with all of you.
So as far as data goes, I don't know, aside from the market research that we did to try to promote some of the other, to continue promoting the programs, the data that we have was during the planning process from our advisory group, focus group, things like that. And I don't know, I guess I'm just talking in a circle here, Tami. I don't know if I have a good response to this. I mean, we know this is something that we need to help, especially for the peer support groups where you're meeting with others on the mental health, virtual mental health. You're doing that from the privacy of your home. So that might be one reason why there's been such a interest in that program. But Tim, I'll turn it over to you to answer as well.
We do. It's a great question. And it may be one that we want to dig into just a little bit more, because the change over time, we still do have a bit of time to be assessing this. I think we do have some market data. We did for a marketing campaign related to this. We had them do online behavior analysis of youth workers in our state. So, oftentimes we do the surveys, and yet the surveys can have that influence of knowing you're being surveyed. So the behavior analysis watches where people track online of folks and what they click on. And we did notice a slight difference there between a comfort level in talking about mental health, particularly between youth workers of color and youth workers as a full general population. So I think it's going to be the change over time and the impact, I think, is a great question. And I just typed it into the chat for next Friday's discussion. So we'll get back to you. Perhaps.
I mean, the fact that you surpassed the number you were hoping to serve right away, I mean, I think that shows the demand. So, that's incredible and encouraging. And maybe if you could just quickly share. So I know that the Lilly Endowment made an enormous investment in this. But I also know that the cost of this service in particular is not overwhelmingly large, right? I mean, if other folks want to explore this for their state, their community, their organization, how would they do that? What does that look like?
Yes, it was mind-blowingly economical, so right now we're at about 13,000 enrollees. The cost per enrollee per month is less than $5 an individual. And so to think about unlimited telehealth, unlimited virtual mental health, that's very cost effective. There are several providers out there. We did an RFP process. We vetted a handful of providers. We ended up going with one that has worked with several of the school districts in our school. And we were able to talk to those school districts directly and say, how's it going? What do you wish you knew? That kind of thing. So again, I think for us offering it across organizations and being kind of a central hub for youth serving organizations is unique. It is not unique for these service providers in our state in other fields.
Great. So I want to go back to Abra. You've been spreading these wellness practices. I'm curious if you've gotten feedback from providers in the community. Is it starting to make a difference in their own staff retention and how they're, supporting their own staff?
Yes. So we are still awaiting some of our most recent surveys, but just from some of our more casual conversations, we are hearing and seeing that that retention it has been increased. So we're seeing a lot of, at one point in time, we were seeing a lot of turnover in the organizations with the different meetings they were showing up to. And now we're seeing that there are more employees that are staying for longer periods of time.
Okay.
And so again, we're still waiting for that actual survey feedback with the actual data, but from what we're seeing and the conversations that we're having, it does seem to be impactful.
Amazing. So I mentioned at the beginning that this week there's been quite a bit of conversation in the field, particularly in philanthropy, around this data that came out of the State of Nonprofits from Center for Effective Philanthropy. They had a webinar yesterday. They queued up a number of opinion pieces throughout the week. And I had shared with these leaders, one in particular from Rusty Stahl, who leads Fund the People. So they really have been for years looking at the burnout issue and how nonprofit workers need better supports and really ultimately better compensation. He had an interesting take on the data, which was wellness programs are good and they're a Band-Aid. This is really a symptom to a larger problem. And his his thesis was essentially that the issue is compensation. If we better compensated people, they would be able to show up more fully. We wouldn't have staffing issues, staffing shortages that cause more stress and burnout. And, they'd have better work conditions if nonprofits were more fully funded. So I'm curious, as folks who have implemented wellness, what are your thoughts on that? How does that sit with you?
Absolutely. I guess I can start. I'm so glad you brought that up. It was a very interesting read. And I really feel like it's both and. We should be able to have the wellness supports, again, to show individuals that we value them. When someone feels valued, it's kind of like the saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. When we show that we care for our employees, then they're able to and want to produce even more, for the organization and for the ultimate goals. I think both are important, though. Of course, it's important to have increased wages. One of our affinity groups, our inclusion and equity affinity group, one of the main goals is wage equity. And so we've actually been focusing on this for the past 2 to 3 years. We took an Annie E. Casey assessment. And one of the main goals that came out of that assessment was to support for wage equity. And so our affinity group has had lots of conversations with funders. We have done some additional data and research. We are seeking grants and trying to find a way to increase even healthcare packages amongst the OST sector. And so, yes, that is extremely important. And while we're doing that work to try to increase wages, not just pay, but also healthcare benefits and things of that nature, we also want to support our staff and their wellness. So through financial means and also through education and experiencing those tools and wellness practices as well. So I truly believe it's a both and, that we can support our staff's wellness through those experiences, through funding, through practices and education, and also support and advocate for increased wages and equity.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. So knowing we have funders in this audience, this is our community. I'd love for you to share some advice, or whether you've seen good funding practices through your own partnerships, or what you think would be helpful for philanthropy to know about how to really support nonprofits who may be doing that both and approach. Anyone want to start on that?
I can just jump in with one because I think I was supposed to cover this in my slide. So, one of the things that was so valuable, that was invaluable to us, was a planning grant, right? All of those focus groups and that feedback from the sector and the engagement and the advisory groups would not have been possible without the funder acknowledging that we needed to do that groundwork and funding us to do that. And so I think that's something that I would advise is to ensure a strong launch, you need to have ample time and resources to support the initial build.
And I think another thing I would add is, it's so important to be strategic about everything we do. And when we think about the impact of youth work, it comes from the people who are doing the work, the people who are working with the youth. We're not building buildings. It's not a construction company. It is human beings working with other human beings. And so if we're thinking very strategically about how we protect our biggest asset, that is something that should be funded and should be included in a grant competition at a fair, thriving rate. I think a previous mindset, in this blog that you shared, there's a difference between a one and done, hey, we're going to do yoga today, or we have a strategic, well thought out initiative around wellness. And I think the same can be true when we think about programming and grant making. Gone are the days where we can say, oh, people get into youth work because they love kids. And they do, but you cannot pay your bills on love. And to ensure that folks can continue and programs can continue to do impactful work, their staff needs to be well-trained and well-resourced and well-supported so that we can have continuity of care for kids and provide deeper, better service.
You're here. All right. I think we're going to stop on that note. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing your incredible work. I want to remind folks that we have no calls in July and August, so we'll see you back in September. We hope you have a wonderful, safe summer, and take care of yourselves.